Welcome to devMode.fm, a podcast dedicated to the tools, techniques, and technologies used in modern web development. I'm Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107.
I'm Patrick Harrington from Mildly Geeky in Boston.
And I'm Paulo Elias from PBS Kids Digital.
And today we have on Segun Adebayo, the creator of Chakra UI. How you doing, Segun?
Hi, I'm doing really good. Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And the reason we wanted to have you on is we wanted to talk to you about this Chakra UI thing that you created, and we saw that you were nominated as a GitHub star and all this stuff, so we figured we better get you on here before you get too big, you know? Before we can't get a hold of you, we only get a hold of your handler. But Segun, so if you were flying over the Adirondack Mountains, ready to jump out of a plane, doing your first tandem skydive jump, and your instructor turns to you and says, "Hey, Segun, what is Chakra UI anyway?" Like, what would you tell him?
Yeah, Chakra UI is a tool that you use to build apps and websites with speed.
And with speed like that, you guys are jumping out of the plane.
Exactly.
There you go.
Man, that was short and sweet. You've done this before. Finally, someone that can get this stuff before the certain death approaches.
I know. I mean, we do these intros all the time, and a lot of people are just, they're flustered, but you're just like, no, I don't care. I'm going to get
the
this.
line's running right at me. Why are they asking me about React?
So how did it all begin, though? How did you go to create Chakra UI? Is it something that came out of some need that you had, or what was your reason or impetus, I should say, for creating this thing?
Yeah, so most of the time when I think about myself, I always tell people that I solve problems for a living. I'm not exactly, you can call me a UI engineer or a designer, but primarily I notice and solve problems for a living. One of the things that inspired Chakra UI was literally working with a couple of front-end engineer friends that I have. I used to work as a UI designer close to 6 years ago, and I worked as a product designer for 4 years before switching over to front-end engineering. So during this time, I started to notice like how really difficult it is to match my designs one-to-one with code. And I started to see like this huge gap, right? So most developers at the time were using design, Material UI, a couple of Bootstrap, and just trying to figure out how they can sort of match the designs with code.
And cutting and pasting stuff all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And, I mean, whether it's from Stack Overflow or from some other websites, right? You just go grab some class names and just like try to style them and stuff, right?
That's so funny because I am not a designer, but I do some stuff in Photoshop from time to time. My wife is a designer, and she makes fun of me all the time because I go in Photoshop and I create a new document every time because I suck at it. I don't know how to use the layers or anything. So every time she looks over at me and she's like, "New document?" You know. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I when I noticed this problem, I wanted to see how I could help my friends. Literally, so most of this started with just helping my friends because I noticed it was really hard for us to deliver on target for the product and the business we were working on at the time, right? So I thought that this is an interesting problem to solve, and if I can help my friends and my colleagues sort of ship products fast, maybe it can also be useful for me because I have a couple of products I'd like to build. So I thought maybe I could solve my own problem and the problem of my friend. So
I think that's the way a lot of these open source projects get started, is when you're scratching your own itch.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the interesting part for me is the fact that when I saw this problem, I was still a designer. And I literally didn't have so much programming experience, you would call it. I would say, I think I had some WordPress experience. And I mean,
we won't talk about that. We won't talk about
and in the era of WordPress where you go like change the CSS and just add some custom CSS just to make things look good. So that was all the experience I had. So I'm seeing this challenge and trying to solve this challenge without so much knowledge and experience. I think that was a really, really good part that I'll say I'm really proud of, to be able to take on such an interesting problem and be able to prefer like a really good solution to it.
Now, what was the first component that you made when you were sitting down to work on this thing? What was the absolute first component? You're like, all right, I'm going to make this thing. What was it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say as usual, it's always the button.
I knew it. It has to be, right? It's
Sick of
always
making
the button.
one-off buttons, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit tricky though, but I mean, I think I was able to literally like figure it out.
Well, I think the hard part in designing these things, because I have seen button components that are massive, right? So there's always this kind of tension or balance between getting something prefab that you can get up and running and then making it flexible enough that it will fit into all of the use cases. Is that an issue that you ran into when you're working on Chakra?
Yeah, so that's this is one of the key features actually. I think one of the most liked feature in Chakra UI. The fact that I can take a button from Chakra UI and it comes with a default UI. So there's a way the button looks by default. But if you wanted to extend that a little bit, it's like super easy. If you're a React developer, you can easily just pass any props to that. You can change the height, change the color without going into CSS to sort of add some class name and all of that. So that's one of the things people like about Chakra. And I mean, I'd say I'll give a lot of credit to the IKEA design team because one of the things I think I learned a lot from IKEA is the fact that literally almost every furniture that's made sort of has their own separate parts and they all come together really nicely. So I literally saw that and I thought that might be an interesting way to also build components as well. Every component comes with their part and you can actually assemble them really nicely and customize them all you want.
Why don't we take a step back and explain to people what Chakra UI is so people that haven't used React or design systems can just have a better idea of what it is and how it's used.
Okay, cool. Right. So generally, I always say Chakra UI is a React component library that helps you build websites, apps, and design systems with speed. What this means is we literally have a ton of components. I think over 50 plus components that you can literally use as the building blocks for your application or website. Some of the key features we have in Chakra UI, one would be, for example, support for theming, right? So this means even though like Chakra UI comes with a default theme, what a theme means is literally a giant object that consists of the colors, fonts, line heights, letter spacing, all the different tokens that make up your app. That's literally what a theme is. And Chakra UI takes careful consideration of the theme. So it's really easy for you to extend that when you have your own design requirements. But by default, it comes with very sensible, beautiful looking theme default that you can use to sort of customize your website.
So out of the box, it just works and it looks wonderful.
Exactly.
But it's
out of the box, it works. And I think one of the things I would also love to mention is the fact that almost all of the interactive components in Chakra UI literally follow the accessibility guidelines. So there is actually a body WAI that sort of like sets the standard for any interactive widget. So Chakra UI literally conforms to all of these international standards as well.
And where did you come up with the name for Chakra UI? I mean, I look at, Foundation makes sense, Bootstrap, you pick up by yourself with your bootstraps and then weighing yourself down with 800 kilobytes of JavaScript. Where did Chakra come from?
Yeah, it's a very funny story if you ask me.
I try.
Yeah, so Chakra UI, I'm an anime fan, first of all. So I watch Naruto a lot. So like when I had to think of a name, I just felt like, I mean, there was a day where I was sort of trying to complete, before I did the official release of Chakra UI, I was trying to think of a name and I was just watching Naruto and I mean, I just saw the word Chakra in there in the translation text. And I thought, well, this might not be so bad. Sounds weird, but let's try.
Well, so that's kind of interesting. So chakra means wheel in Sanskrit is where it originally came from. And people talk about that there are 7 main chakras.
Yes.
But they also say that there are up to 114. So you only got 50 components. You got some work still to do, right?
Well, I hope so.
Because you got to get up to 114 components and then you got to just stop there. And no matter what anyone wants, no matter what, you're just like, no, Chakra has 114 components and that's it. But I'm obviously making a joke, but that's actually sort of leads to an interesting question, which is how do you decide what the cutoff is in terms of what you're going to do and what this library is going to do? Because you could get into some incredibly complex scenarios, but do you have sort of a mental idea of where you want this to sit in terms of how complex the components are?
Yes. I mean, right now, the goal for us as Chakra UI would be to create a form of framework or mental guideline, literally to be like the base or the foundation for any design system or website or application. So in as much as we would love to add every single component or complex widget out there, we have a limit to how far we can go. Definitely, because we have like limited human resource. So we don't want to just like focus on too many things at the same time. So we want to just try to provide the 20% of tools that will help you do the 80% of all your work most of the time. So we don't want to go all the way to provide every single thing you need, but you can be rest assured that if you use the tools that Chakra UI provides, you can literally do all your work with ease.
Yeah, because it may not even be a human resource problem. You just might not want the library to do certain things, right? You might want it to be kind of a base layer upon which you can build the more custom stuff. And if someone wanted a component like some kind of complex data table component or something, you might say, maybe not, or use the building blocks or that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good way to put it as well. We have a roadmap of specific components we'd like to add to Chakra UI, and we also have the maximum limit of the number of components. I think once we reach that limit, we might just let Chakra UI be stable for a while and try to build things on top of that instead.
114 is what you're talking about. Right?
No, it's not 114.
Wherever that document is, let me know, and I'll do a PR. I'll change it to 114 so we can get this thing kind of back on track. But what you were talking about before, in terms of Chakra UI providing components, but it also is a design system. So I looked at the config file that you have for it, or the theme file, I should say, and it looks very similar to, like, anyone who's used Tailwind CSS. It looks kind of similar to that, but then Tailwind's config also looks very similar to a lot of styled systems and a lot of these other things. And this is a way that you can define sort of the overall look of everything, right? Is that how it works?
Yes, exactly. So it's just a way to control the entire look of your application or website from one single location. So from a designer's perspective, I think you can think of it more like if you have a couple of styles or symbols in Sketch or Figma, you can just change the entire UI of your website, the colors and fonts from one single place, and it propagates all the way, right, to every single screen or page you've designed, right? So for the code version of that, we created this concept of a theme object, and then you just literally add all the colors, the fonts, the line heights, literally all the tokens, and you can just control how your app looks like from one single place. And that's such a relief most of the time.
And it looks like, just to nerd out for a second, it looks like under the hood you're using Emotion for the CSS and JS. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So we use a combination of tools. Right now we are leveraging both Style System and Emotion under the hood for most of the style calculations and CSS stuff.
Yeah, and we had Key and Mitchell on to talk about Emotion a while ago, so I wanted to just kind of give a shout out to them because they're doing awesome stuff, and it's really cool to see that you are leveraging this tool that they made, and then other people are then leveraging the tool that you make. Have you ever had an instance like that where you looked around, you spent all this time working your butt off making Chakra UI, but you looked around and you're like, wow, look at the people that are using this thing. You got 11,000 stars on GitHub and all sorts of crazy stuff. You ever had any moments like that where you're just like, hey, wow, this is crazy. How many people are using this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I had one of such moments like yesterday, interestingly. So I just like took up some time to literally just reflect on the progress of Chakra UI, and it's been really amazing and humbling, if you ask me, because I take a look at the NPM stats and I see 350,000 people have downloaded Chakra UI, and I'm like, this is so amazing, because when I made Chakra UI, I never had it in mind for it to go this far. Literally, I just thought this was just a tool for my friends.
Here's a big question, though. Here's a very important question, though. Segun,
yes, please.
Which is, when you saw that many people had downloaded this thing, were you excited or were you scared, or both?
Yeah, I think it's both. Yeah, so
pushing a new release becomes really terrifying.
Yeah, so it's like there's an excitement that really, there's an excitement and also pride, personal pride, that I know that I made this thing and this number of people actually find it useful. There's a certain level of happiness and joy that comes from that. And obviously there's also this voice in your head that tells you, man, you can see this amount of people, you cannot afford afford to let them down, and just make sure there are no issues in this project. Otherwise, they will all call you out on Twitter, and then it's like, and then it's like all of these different voices. But I think at the end of the day, I meet most of these thoughts with the feeling and the thoughts of being grateful and being privileged to be in this position, right? And I think over time, I just see the value and I see the community around Chakra UI. Most of the time, I don't even drive the engagement in the community. I have colleagues, I have core contributors that help me manage the community. But when I see all of this and the way people come on to ask questions and the way they see their problems and get their problems solved, I mean, it just makes me happy that finally we have, I mean, I'm able to build something that's way beyond myself.
Yeah, you have managed to touch people that you may never meet around the world just by this thing that you created. I mean, that's pretty special, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. It's like, it's one of the things I know I've done in my life that I'm really grateful and I feel proud of.
Now, but does it ever feel like a burden? Okay, and I'm going to frame this so Caleb Porzio is someone we had on recently that he did Alpine JS and Livewire and some other stuff in the Laravel ecosystem. And he was tweeting out about, how it's kind of difficult being an open source maintainer because there's just so many issues that get open and so much support. Have you found a way to deal with that?
Yes, actually, I think for me, it's just literally just killing. There's this feeling of being anxious to sort of check GitHub issues and GitHub notification when you become an open source maintainer, because every morning when you wake up, your mind is like, go check GitHub. People are using Chakra UI. Just check what are the issues, what are the pull requests. But I think I've learned over time to literally just like know that my world or my life does not evolve around Chakra UI. I have a life, right? So I have a life. I have a family I need to take care of, and that sort of puts me in a different mindset because I know that I'm helping everybody out there, and I know by default that if you help people get what they want, you would also get what you want in life. So I just like have that mindset of being helpful to other people and not think too much about the GitHub notifications, because I rarely open my GitHub notifications except when I want to check or fix an issue.
I think that's a great way to think about things, because we were talking earlier and I mentioned to you that you're originally from Lagos, Nigeria, and I mentioned to you that my mother was in the Peace Corps and had spent time in Nigeria a long time ago. What you're talking about in terms of helping other people out is what helps you out. I think is something that I learned from her. And I think it's a great thing for a lot of people to understand, and it definitely can make your life better, right? And it sounds like you're experiencing that.
Yeah, I think most of the time people see open source as like you're working for free for a bunch of people and they're not paying you anything and then you're fixing issues for them. But I think I see a little bit beyond that. It's mostly the fact that if you can help other people and sort of leave a positive impact in your lives, maybe the return of that might not come from them, but it might come from someone else, right? And just like I shared with you, this is the open source project Chakra UI that I made has literally opened up lots of opportunities for me, opportunities to speak, opportunities to consult for companies, and even the job I have right now. So these are benefits, I would say, of like helping people out there in general.
So your current job, you got this job because of Chakra UI that you created. Is that right? I mean, did they contact you? How did that work out?
Yeah, I think it's actually a very interesting story. I had a lot of offers, a couple of offers when I released Chakra UI. So it was literally one of those periods where you have to pick from a couple of really good offers, and it was actually quite nice. So
what a great problem to have.
Yeah, it's a great problem to have if you ask me. So I
just became the best looking girl at the dance, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I got a couple of Twitter DMs, and I think Twitter is a great tool most of the time these days when it comes to like publishing or talking about your work and the opportunities that come from that. So I literally just like went through a couple of offers and just picked the best option for me.
And when you walked in, and we were talking about this, you walked in to this new job and you looked over and people were sitting there and they were using Chakra UI. So they were building their business, or at least a part of their business, on this thing that you had created. What were your feelings when you saw that?
Yeah, that was interesting because when I joined the company, I didn't join full time. I came on a 3 months contract, and I just wanted to see how it would feel like working with the team there and helping them build a stable design system for the products and the company. Right. So I walk into the door, and then there's this group of people already shouting, sort of hailing me that, hey, that's the Chakra UI guy. And then
Anyone ask for an
everyone,
autograph? Anyone ask for autographs?
no, well, most of them asked for a selfie.
Oh
Oh
my
my
goodness.
gosh.
So that was like super
Wild.
cool. And then when we were all standing up to take a selfie, I just took a look at someone's laptop, and I could literally see that Chakra UI all over the place on their laptop, and everyone has Chakra UI docs open pinned on their browser. And then that was like super cool. And okay, this looks like a really good place to be.
Yeah, really.
That's amazing, but that's also pressure, right?
And
Yeah.
no, I'm so surprised. Like, I had not heard of Chakra UI until Andrew had reached out to you on Twitter, and I took a look. Yeah, you, like Andrew said, you have 11,500 stars on GitHub, and so many of our listeners are in the kind of craft CMS ecosystem. Craft only has 2,200, and this is far and away more. Which, first of all, if you're listening to this and you haven't started Craft, like, come on, throw it a star. But how have I not heard of Chakra before now? Is it because Simon Swiss hasn't found out about it yet? I don't know if you know him. He's a very big influencer. You should get a hold of
Yes, I
him.
know him.
Big guy. Yeah.
See, here's the thing, Patrick. So Simon totally already knows Segun and actually wants to have him on to do streaming and all that kind of fun stuff.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, of course he does.
Yeah,
So
the attention. Yeah.
I think the reason you might not have heard of it is it really is sort of so the web development world is so huge that you can have different people working in different areas and you'll never hear of it. So
Yeah.
if you were not working the React land on React front end stuff, you might not have heard of it. You know, like it makes sense.
I was going to say, we were actually evaluating it when we were doing the IDEO.com sort of re-architecture, or I was evaluating it. And what I loved about Chakra UI was the composability of all the components. But also the API that you use to bring in, the style props and the different sort of styling design tokens. It's super flexible, and it's a really well thought out sort of little design system. One of the first ones that I felt was really worth the time to get into and start using. So, but it's also funny if you're not in the React ecosystem. Most of the people in the Craft ecosystem, they use Tailwind, and before that, Bootstrap or Foundation to get their sort of base sort of going, and they don't really use React on the front end. So it's unique in that how wide, what Andrew was saying, how wide and how big the web development world is, that if you're in this little sort of bucket of what you do and you rarely get out of it, you don't really hear about these things. And sometimes I think it's a shame that people get stuck in their sort of little bubble. And when you see resistance to getting out of it, it's like, come on, man.
I like to think of them as tide pools, right? Like so every little niche in front end web development is like a tide pool. And they've got their own little ecosystems. Everything's going great. And then every now and again, a huge wave comes in and just smashes it. And these people get scattered and go all over the place. And I think every now and again, there are technologies that this ends up happening to. And it kind of affects and, distributes the people from different ecosystems. And so the interesting thing about Chakra UI to me is that while you originally developed this using React, it also is available for Vue. Is that something that you did, or did someone else do that? Or what's going on there, Segun?
Yeah, I mean, I have this great friend of mine. His name is Jonathan. So when I released the Chakra UI React, he reached out to me on Twitter, wanting to help me create the Vue.js port of Chakra UI. So I think he spent close to 6 to 8 months doing that. So right now we have Chakra UI Vue. I think it's pretty stable, but then it's currently trying to optimize that for Vue 3. So right now, if you are using Vue 2, you can definitely try out Chakra UI. But I'll definitely advise, because it has lots of amazing stuff coming up for Vue 3 as well.
And the reason I wanted to make sure I mentioned that is piggyback off of what Paulo was saying, which is that a lot of people in the Craft CMS world use Vue. Like I happen to know more people that use Vue than use React. There's a little smattering of both, but obviously worldwide, React is by far and away much, much more popular as a framework. But the thing that amazes
Library,
me,
not framework.
Whatever. Library, framework, whatever you want to call it. I don't care.
Sorry, I don't want to distract you.
Segun, thing that amazes me is you're telling me that you're a designer, and not only did you then pick up React, but you're also doing things in TypeScript. Like we just did a podcast on TypeScript, in fact. So what was it like learning all of this stuff? Like I would think that, I mean, to me, if I was coming from being primarily a designer and having to learn not just front end development, but then also React and TypeScript and all that, it seems like a lot.
Yeah, it is. It actually, to be honest, it's one of those things where you tell people that don't try this at home, because I mean, it's definitely like I think it was a really challenging process for me, and even just releasing the current Chakra UI version that we have, I literally had to learn a bit of TypeScript to at least make type definition files for almost every single component, and I can remember I can remember how painful it was back then going to GitHub, definitely typed, and literally checking every index.d.ts file you see there just to learn how does this TypeScripting work, and checking the TypeScript handbook and taking a few courses on front-end masters just to like get through this entire like annoying TypeScript that would never let your project build, right?
I think that course on front-end masters is great, though. I took that same TypeScript course when I was learning. I think that's a great course.
It's an awesome course.
Yeah, I think Mike Knott is a really amazing teacher when it comes to TypeScript, and I mean, shout out to him, because I mean, if I didn't watch the video, I'm not sure I would have the confidence to even ship Chakra at all.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. Yeah. And I think that, again, we're talking about people doing stuff and then other people building on it. And it's just everywhere, because the world that we live in with technology, there's just way too much stuff for anyone to learn everything. So we do have to constantly be building on other things. And that's what your component library does as well. I want Paulo to explain to us what composability means. Like you mentioned that the Chakra UI components are composable. So what does that actually mean, though?
If you want me to describe that.
Yeah.
So it's so especially when you're learning React, you can sort of paint yourself into a corner where each React component you build probably does more than it should. And then when you come back to, you have to add other additional functionality, you're sort of adding duct tape to one or two very large components. So with composability is you basically build each React component to its very basic minimum sort of use case. And then you can use those components on top of each other to build out a larger sort of React component composed of smaller ones that fit together and are easy to swap out and change and update and style. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, and Segun, I would imagine that is something that would make Chakra UI kind of evergreen, if that you built it in such a way that it has a lot of these base components that are composable. You could make something really complicated by composing them together. Is that kind of what you're going for?
Yes, exactly. So think of it more like a set of Lego bricks. That's literally what we are aiming for. So we want to give you all the pieces you need to build almost anything you can imagine, right? And one of these interesting reality, though, when we are building components in React, is at some point down the line, is either the style will have to change, or maybe the way things work would have to change a bit based on business logic or based on the design constraints or design requirements, right? So this is one interesting part, or the most frustrating part for a front-end developer, and that's that I made this design, or I wrote the code for this design, and 2 weeks down the line, the design has changed to something I cannot manage to style. Right, so that's how it gets, and I think that's one of the tough realities of being a front-end engineer. But then the goal is, how can we build components in such a way that even though we are done for now, these components can change or transform into anything in the future very easily.
Yeah, that really hits home, because so some of the work that I do, most of the programming that I do, I don't need to deal with a designer, but sometimes when I do, it's my wife she's got her master's in design, right? So she'll give me a design, and then she'll end up changing it, like you're saying, down the road, and I'll just look at her and I'll be all annoyed, and I'm just like, oh, I really, and then, but you know what? There was a point where I realized, you know what? My frustration here really is that the way I built this is not very good, because if I built this in a sound way, it wouldn't be a big deal to then make some of these changes. And I think that is amazing that that's the way you're approaching this whole component library, that you want it to be easy to be able to then, the designer comes to you and says, hey, can you tweak this? You can be like, sure.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, I think that's literally the spirit behind Chakra UI. It's just to make it really easy to sort of design or develop or write code for change, which
Mm-hmm.
means that things will most likely change down the line. So the more composable it is, the more easy it is to access literally the inner parts of any component. The easier it would be for the developer down the line, or it could even be your future self if you're still in the same company, maybe.
Right. No, I think most code that I write or that most people write is for your future self in one degree or another, because
Yeah, exactly.
most of the time you're the one that's going to go back looking at it. So if you half-assed it and you didn't do a great job, you're the one that's going to be paying for it at some point down the road.
Yeah, that's a great delineation between like sort of a junior developer and a more senior developer. Is you're writing code that you're going to throw away. You don't get attached to it, or you're going to you change it sometime down the line. And I remember being in that position a long time ago. I'm like, I don't want to redo this. I just spent 5 hours building out this landing page. Why do I have to redo this whole design? So yeah, that's what I love about things like Chakra that help you make that sort of whole process go faster.
And it looks like you're using the emotion and style components, the CSS and JS, so that you can just stay in your JavaScript or your JSX or your TSX or whatever, and you don't have to then go out and write a separate CSS file. Was that an intentional design constraint that you decided to do?
Yeah, that was pretty intentional. I would say that I didn't initially know so much about CSS and JS. So I think what I wanted to do, coming from my design background, would be, can I look at a piece of code as a designer and just feel comfortable that I understand what it does, right? So I thought, okay, so what if I can just create some component called a box, and if I just see a prop called BG and I see a prop called font size, it feels a bit relatable to me as a designer. And if I wanted to style the interactive states and I see _over or _active or press, I mean, it feels a bit more natural to me that, oh, okay, so I'm trying to style this component state. And I just find it a bit more interesting. So I tried the CSS approach, but it didn't turn out to be good, right? So I just took a look at other alternatives and I stumbled upon this thing called style components. And then I explored style components for a while. And for some reason, I just switched over to emotion. And I felt, oh, I think this is a little bit better for me at the time. So I just decided to try that.
Yeah, I had the exact same reaction to style components and emotion. Started using style components and then just somehow, can't remember how I found emotion. Maybe I think it was when Kent C. Dodds was winding down, is it Glamorous or whatever, his CSS and JS library, and said, everyone go use emotion. I was like, okay, let me try it out. And I don't know what it was, because right now the API is fairly similar. But I think back then it just felt more natural way to use things.
Yeah, I agree.
So just taking a step back, though, Chakra UI, was this built with the intention of being able to build anything in particular, like being really good at building dashboards or being really good at building interactive web app style things? Or did you want to make it broad enough that it would be something you would reach no matter what you were building, even if you were building some kind of a client brochure site or something? Like, is there a niche where you think this component library sits?
Right now, I would say there's no niche. I literally just wanted it to be a toolkit for every front-end engineer in the world. So like, if you wanted to build anything, you just feel naturally confident. And there's this feeling when you're working with a designer and you literally just have to check the designs sometimes, just to make sure the designer is not making something crazy that's going to drive you nuts, right? So I don't want you to look at a design or look at something in Sketch or Figma and feel anxious that, oh my God, how am I going to create this component? It's so complicated. How am I going to do this? I thought, like, okay, can I literally build a couple of a set or a toolkit, if you call that, for front-end engineers, so you can feel confident to take on any UI related work, even if it needs to be accessible. For example, a modal or a popover, you can literally do all of that with ease with Chakra UI. So I just wanted to provide the basic toolkit to help you take on any interface or any design requirements in your company or in your personal side project.
Yeah, and I guess, it's funny, I've gotten really into Tailwind over the last maybe 2 years at this point. I'd say 2 years. And I mean, one thing I like just looking at Chakra is even the config, even setting up feels similar to Tailwind. Mm-hmm. What do you find? Are people able to make the transition if they're using Tailwind and looking at Triad Chakra, is that an easy transition from one to the other, where one is many times you're dealing with just CSS classes, and this is actually props on your React components, or if you're using the view, set up a view component? Is that an easy transition for people to make? Are there benefits? I have to think a lot of people are used to Tailwind and used to just being able to throw in CSS classes. Is it a big shift to change that? And are there benefits that you get by using that kind of a way of building components rather than through CSS classes?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think one of the general things to consider when building any software, if you ask me, is to try to at least mirror the same like user experience or customer experience that other competitions might have, right? So that's why you would see Figma and Sketch are very similar UIs, but maybe it just works a little bit differently, and one might be better to use depending on the scenario, right? So that's exactly how I feel when I think about it. And with Tailwind CSS, I think we try to stay as close as possible to these styling or utility classes. So it's almost, I wouldn't say it's not exactly a one-to-one mapping, but it's almost a one-to-one relationship when it comes to this utility class translates automatically to props in the React component, right? So definitely, I think it's really easy to make the switch. And again, because Tailwind CSS is just a bunch of utility classes, it makes it easy to just install Chakra UI, because either way, Chakra UI works pretty well. You're just adding a bunch of class names, and you can gradually migrate all your components. Just convert the class names to props, and just enjoy the feeling of passing props to your components and controlling them anyhow you'd like them to be. I think one of the biggest advantages of doing all of that in JSX props as opposed to class names is sort of like the ease of overriding these styles, right? So if you have ever worked in a large team, one of the things you know is you might have a couple of buttons, all the buttons are looking consistent, and then for just one occasion we need to maybe make the height different, or make the background color different, or just make it look like pop out a little bit more, just for that single use case. When you are using that from a JSX props perspective, you can easily just override a certain property because it's all props, right? But when it comes to class names, you might probably figure out how do I like control, maybe pass an extra class name around to override the default class name. And you just have to be careful when it comes to like concatenating the strings so you don't mess things up. But you just get a certain amount of confidence by knowing that I can style anything via props and just pass any props to any component, and you can override at any point in time to sort of lock in a specific design requirement without affecting the whole bunch.
Yeah, and I think this is a tide pool ecosystem thing too, right? Because if you're someone that you're used to writing things in React and JSX, it actually feels kind of weird to use Tailwind classes, right? Segun, like it's not how you are used to doing this stuff. But Patrick, if you did want that, Ben Rogerson made something called Twin, and I actually wrote an article on it, in that you can use Tailwind CSS with emotion styled components. So this Twin macro basically allows you to just put any Tailwind classes you want, and you can put those on the components. And I would imagine, assuming that you have this macro installed, it should just work with Chakra UI as well.
And someone on this podcast actually released a Gatsby and Next.js starter kit for Emotion and Tailwind. So
yeah,
check that
out. Are you using Twin on that as well, Paula?
Yeah. Actually, Ben Rogerson submitted a PR when he released it. So
nice.
Those are all updated for.
Yeah. So if that was something that you wanted, Patrick, you should be able to use that same thing. So if it was a more comfortable transition for you, then you could still just use your Tailwind classes where you want, and you could combine them with the emotion props like anywhere that you wanted. So you could kind of mix and match them.
Yeah, I definitely, one thing I'd like to get to, at the end, it's all coming out code, it's all coming out styling, is like, what's the better dev experience? What's going to be nicer? No, and for code inspection, trying to find where we've reused things and need to further abstract things out, I feel like something like Chakra or like this Twin setup for Tailwind is going to help with just the overall dev experience too. So I'm interested in it.
Yeah, once you get used to it and you know where the CSS is, if you're writing custom CSS, it's depending on how you write it, of course, but with like Emotion, I keep all my CSS within the component. And so you know where you're going to be looking. And especially in a team environment, you're not having that situation where Segun talked about, where you're like, okay, I can't find this in this 10,000 line CSS file. I'm just going to add it to the end. And then you get into a situation where you have like 13 different ways of your styling a button when it should be just an extension of one. So it's much, I mean, for my experience, it's a much better developer experience knowing where to find things, and things seem to go quicker.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing where in the tide pool over here, the blue crab, the way he builds his nest to attract the ladies may be very different from the way that the red crab in this other tide pool builds its nest to attract the ladies. You know what I mean? Like it's just, and one will feel really weird to the other in terms of like if you are a hardcore React JSX developer, you're going to probably want to do it this way with style components, I would think.
Yes, I think one of the biggest things to know in general though is the moment you start using Chakra and you start to use the style props, there's a very high chance you'll never go back.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah, and it all depends on where you live, right? And if you start getting into that world where everything you're writing is a React component and in JSX, you don't want to go anywhere else, right? You don't want to look anything up in a CSS file. You want everything to be right there in that one locality where you can do your thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some other things I would like to just draw our attention to with Chakra is not just the styling approach or the fact that Chakra UI makes it easy for you to style, right? So once you need to create more complex widgets like the models, the popovers, the tooltips, and sliders and things like that, then you start to realize that this is way more than styling. Now I need to write the logic for this component and make sure that I follow the accessibility standards for this component and write tests for them. And then, you start to feel the pressure or the pain of being a front-end engineer in general, right? But then all of this is what Chakra takes away from you. So we just take care of all the logic, take care of all the standards you need to meet, and just help you focus only on how do I get this looking exactly like this for my app, and just ship that with confidence because it's just going to work out of the box.
And I noticed that Chakra is using Storybook. Are you using that for your documentation, or what is that being used for?
Yeah, we use Storybook for local component development. So most of the time, we just like to build components in isolation and test them. Right. So Storybook helps us a lot with that, to just test out different use cases for a component, render that on screen and see how it looks, and just try to play around with it to make sure that we cover all the edge cases possible.
Yeah, we did that during our re-architecture, and it's such a nice way to build front ends. Just get it looking great and functioning great in its isolation, then you can bring it into the project.
And the reason why I'm asking is I'm wondering if I'm a company and I'm looking to adopt something like Chakra UI, and I'm probably going to have my own corporate themes and we're going to be customizing it, and it's great that Chakra allows me to do that. Do I hit the ground running if I want to then document this stuff using Storybook? Is that something that comes baked in some way, or makes it easier for me to do if I'm using Chakra?
No, unfortunately, no, because Storybook is local to the project and you have to set it up yourself for the project itself. I don't think it comes for free with Chakra.
So it's something you're using internally, but if we wanted to use it on our own, we're on our own, just to kind of go set it up.
Yeah, because I think most components that you build for your business would be, based on your own business domain knowledge, or components specific for your business, right? So there won't be generic components like buttons and models. I think they'll be more specific to the business logic and the business UI in general. So that's why you'd want to have your own custom Storybook. Very
cool. So what do you think, Patrick? Are you interested in giving Chakra UI a shot for the right project that comes along?
Yeah, I am. And it's fine. I've been doing Nuxt quite a bit on a number of projects, and just taking a look, and even like just seeing right now that I could do my Nuxt links with C buttons, like just say like C button as Nuxt link, and it like that just seems terrific.
Right.
Yeah, I want to play around with this.
Nice. Amazing.
And that brings up the point. I'm assuming it has to, but I'm assuming that this does server-side rendering properly too, so that all just works.
Yeah, that just works out of the box. These are things we've tried to, architect very carefully to make sure it works, whether it's client-side or server-side rendering.
Was that a pain to wrap your head around, like what you needed to do in order for that to work properly?
Yeah, that was just like one extra thing. I think when I when I initially launched Chakra UI, I didn't know so much about server-side rendering up until when I saw a couple of issues about like this component and that component is not working in SSR, Next.js, and Gatsby. And I'm just like, I don't even know, what does SSR even mean?
You're like, people are telling you it doesn't work with this, and you're like, what is that?
Exactly. So I think, I mean, I would hold that to lots of like reading and watching YouTube videos and learning a lot about it. Literally just going to the roots to see what happens during SSR and like, I mean, how does it affect the components I've made so far? And then I go back.
Segun, you seem like a nice person, but I feel like you lied to me. Okay, because I feel like you lied to me because all of this stuff that you're telling me that you've done is an amazing amount of work. Like, I don't even know, it just would take so much time to do all this. And you told me you have a girlfriend. Like, I don't believe that you have had time to find a girlfriend and still do all this stuff. Like, it's crazy. How long have you been working on Chakra UI?
So right now, I would say like, I mean, it's close to 1 year and 6 months that I've been working on Chakra UI. I mean, full time. And I mean, when it comes to like having a girlfriend, obviously, I think like I'm grateful to have like a pretty stable relationship. So
allegedly,
that's that
allegedly,
also, like,
we're not sure the girlfriend is real at this point, Segun. I mean,
When you said the word pretty, I'm like, where is he going with this?
yeah. I mean, you claim that she's on a plane and is going to become visiting you tonight, but I don't know. I'm having a hard time believing that with all the stuff that you've had to learn and do, that you've had time to get a girlfriend. Did you get her before you did all this stuff?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I mean, it's like way before I even worked on this. So I mean, I'm grateful to have someone that really understands and sort of gives me the space and time to focus on things like this.
So you've been together for a while. So
Yes.
She was actually probably relieved that you had something to occupy your time. No, but seriously, doing all of this in essentially a year and a half is what you're telling me? Like, that's a lot.
I mean, I would say it's close to 2.5 years, like just in front end engineering in general. But at some point, I had to just like take some time out to focus on Chakra UI, and that's about a year and a half.
Yeah, because the amount of things you had to learn. You know, if you're coming from a designer, you have to learn front end development. You've got to learn React. Then you got to learn TypeScript, and then we got to learn emotion and styled components. And then someone is just like, it doesn't work with SSR, and you're like, oh crap, I guess I got to learn SSR.
But you're also glossing over the fact that even in knowing all that stuff, coming up with the API and how everything works together, I think that would take the longest time, because just using, like, I built a little project with Chakra last night just to play with it, and it just feels so natural, especially coming from, using Tailwind quite a bit too. It just feels really natural and right when you're using these components together. So for me, getting that right is probably the biggest time sink.
Yeah, because it probably requires a clarity of vision, a way of thinking about this thing clearly to be able to construct it so that you have a nice higher level vision of what the thing is going to be. How did you manage to get good at that, Segun?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting if you ask me. I think I always have a very interesting answer when anyone asks me. And one of the things I always say is I think Figma really helped me a lot. As very unrelated as it sounds, I think I take a lot of time trying to clean up and sort of orchestrate my Figma components when I design. So if I wanted to design a model in Figma, I wouldn't just draw a set of rectangles and just put a close button and a bunch of text. I want to make sure I name them correctly. I mean, make sure I sort of like organize them and group them correctly in Figma. It's just a very tiring mental process, but I think that process really helped me. Like when I switched over to React, it sort of felt very similar. So a React component mapped one-to-one to just a simple layer in Figma or Sketch. So I could literally like think about when I group things together in Figma, it means maybe I could just wrap things in React and that becomes a group, right? And I'm just trying to like create some like a form of similarity between my experience in creating detailed Figma components to mapping that to React and just making it feel like a Lego brick instead of a full mold of component that you cannot change in general. So I think that experience helped me a lot. And as weird as it sounds, each time I have to make a component, I think most of these come very natural. Again, I owe all of that to years of design experience.
The inklings of like a really great sort of intro to React course. Build out a simple component and then show people how it maps and works in React. That would be a really interesting approach to teaching people.
Yes, I think that makes sense. I plan to. I have that in the works when I'm currently working on the V1, a major release for Chakra UI. I have that in mind once that is released, to try to sort of bring together my design and React experience here.
This needs to come full circle, Segun. So I think what needs to happen is that you need to have your own front-end master's course on building websites or building apps using Chakra UI. Like, I think it has to come full circle, where you were learning from Mike North. You were learning from him on TypeScript. Well, now you need your own course on front end masters on Chakra UI. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'm definitely open to that. So, I mean, I think I know a couple of things I need to do to make that happen. But definitely,
we can start the Twitter polls for that too.
Yeah, we can do that. Set up a quick just to get feedback. But I'm sure a lot of people would find it valuable in general. And I think it's not exactly entirely related to Chakra, but it's literally just like, how do you think about building components in general, making sure they're flexible enough, the API feels intuitive enough, and then you could add a layer of Chakra UI or Tailwind CSS to that. It doesn't have to be exactly tied to one framework, but sure, I'm biased to Chakra UI, so I'm most likely going to use Chakra UI.
I think that's really interesting that the design tool is what informed your component creation as opposed to the other way around. Like, I think it's really interesting, and maybe that actually was what allowed you to have such clarity in making this thing, is you had spent so much time using these tools like Figma to create this stuff that you already kind of knew how all this should work, right? You might not have known, when you open up the hood of your car, you might not have known how it all worked, but it really, from a higher level perspective, you kind of had that nailed going in.
Yeah, sure, exactly. I think, working as a designer, you need to read a lot of design guidelines. You need to read material UI guidelines. Sometimes you have to read Apple's human interaction guidelines as well, and just take a look at other websites and apps and check their design systems. I mean, this is what you do every single day as a designer, just to get some inspiration going for any work you have to do. You have to spend thousands of hours on Dribble just to look through good and bad designs to be able to pick the ones that might inspire you. I think all of this work that you do to sort of feed your mind with, I think all of that just produces some form of pattern that you would most likely reuse, or you might find useful when it's time to work, right? So all of this, it comes like quite natural to me when I have to make a component look good, even if it's a default component coming from Chakra UI, because of all these years of staring at different designs and guidelines. It just makes it natural to just create something that looks good, at least.
My entire life was preparation for this day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's funny because I think it might actually be harder going the other way, where if you were a programmer tasked with creating a component library and you had to go the other way and learn the design and how to structure these things, it might actually be much more difficult for you to do. I think that might be.
It's actually like really, really difficult, because I've tried with a couple of friends who find the work I do on Chakra UI very inspiring, and I try to get them to learn a bit more about design and teach them some guidelines, and they just start to yawn after a while, because because like, this doesn't come natural to me. Like, why do I have to go learn all of this when I can just go use Bootstrap or Tailwind or Chakra? I'm like, that's not the point here. So it feels a little boring at first, but I would naturally argue that if you come from a design background, there's a better chance that you'd be a better front-end engineer than most people. But I could be wrong anyway. So
no, that makes sense.
I got a tough question for you though. If someone had a gun to your head and said, for the rest of your life, you can either be a designer or a developer, you're now someone that is you've been doing both, which would you choose?
At this point in time, I think I'll just be a developer.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And I say that because I feel like I'm able to build anything I can imagine and sort of launch that into the world, whether it's to make money or even just for the good of everyone else out there. I think it's way easier to do that, and the impact is way more as a developer than a designer.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain kind of person that is just a creator. There's someone that they need to feel alive. They need to be building stuff. And I think you might be one of those people, because I can tell that you're really passionate about what you're doing. And then also, just to be able to create something like this, there had to be a decent amount of drive behind it. And it's funny, every discussion of things like this with components, there's always a Lego metaphor, right? always there's Lego metaphor. Me having kids, my experience with Legos is mostly stepping on them in the middle of the night and screaming in pain. But I do think it's a really apt analogy in that you can sit down with just some basic Legos and you can build some amazing stuff, right? You just need your imagination. Whereas if it was prefab, like you could only build the stuff that it's supposed to be,
Exactly.
Well, that has been fantastic, Segun. Thank you for coming on, but that about wraps it up for another episode of the devMode.fm podcast. If you enjoy the show, tell Patrick to make this shorter and make sure to subscribe, tell a friend, or drop us a review. We really appreciate it. For the devMode.fm podcast, I'm Andrew Welch.
I'm Patrick Harrington.
I'm Paulo Elias.
And thank you, Segun Adebayo.
Thank you so much for having me. I think I really enjoyed this chat. Thank you so much.
Awesome. We really enjoyed having you on
here,
too, man. It's been fantastic. And I lost my window. Oh my God. Hold on. Oh my God. It's here somewhere. I can't even stop this recording now. Oh, there it is. Fantastic. So Segun, come clean. Is there really a girlfriend coming? Like coming on a plane in a couple hours?
Yeah, that's happening for real. Trust me.
It's actually happening. All right, cool. Stopping the recording.